Well, happy National Girls and Women in Sports Day. Right now we have Audra Martin in with us. You've probably seen her before. FanDuel Sports North Network, host, reporter, anchor, everything in between. Thanks so much for coming in today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's always good to see you.
You too, of course. And probably a little weird being on the opposite side of
It is. I feel like I'm in the hot seat, right? I know. I'm usually the other person. I'm the person sticking a microphone and a camera in somebody's face, but it's always fun, especially being able to talk on an important day like this.
I know. It's exciting to celebrate the women in the Twin Cities sports scene. There's a lot of us.
We got a good group in Minnesota. I think so. Yeah. I'm biased, but.
Well, first we want to talk about, we see what you do on a daily basis, but where it all began. How did you get interested in sports? Where did your sports career start?
So I was always a sports fan growing up, and I played sports. But then as I got older, the only thing I ever wanted to do in life was to be a police officer.
Wow.
So I actually, every university that I applied to either their criminal justice or law enforcement program, and ended up at University of Central Florida in Orlando as a criminal justice major. And after my first year, decided that I wanted to maybe try some other things. I kept that as well as a degree, but then I added on radio, television, broadcasting. It just was kind of presented to me on a list of majors that you could apply to if you had a certain GPA. And I was looking at the list and I was like, oh, radio, television, that might be kind of fun. So I, on a whim, added that as a second degree. And, from there I knew it was, if I was going to really pursue that, it was going to be sports because I love sports. Yeah. And I feel like the news world is so hard with all of the negativity. And I tend to be a very bubbly, positive, optimistic person. And I just didn't think that it would be a good fit for me to be having to talk about the really serious, the really tough breaking news kind of stories. And plus my passion was always sports. So it just seemed to make sense. And, but then, I called my parents my senior year and told them, hey, surprise, I'm not going to use the degree that I made you guys, help me with. Because I decided to not pursue television, but I took a job in the front office of the Atlanta Braves, thinking that maybe I could, go into the PR side of things. Yeah. And I was there for about 3 months before I realized that I really did want to get into broadcasting. So long story short, it took me years because I got, out of the baseball job and was doing television production. I worked on Family Feud and movies and stuff in Atlanta. And then finally decided to pursue it and applied thanks to Steve Harvey. That's a whole other story. But I was working at Family Feud and Steve Harvey kind of pushed me in the direction of pursuing my dream. And so I did. And my first job was in Huntsville, Alabama. From Huntsville to Nashville, Nashville here.
Wait, that's awesome. That's so cool.
It always is a topic every time I, like podcasts or, things like this. It always comes up because it was such an pivotal part of my career, my journey. But I was working at Family Feud, and Steve always talks to the audience. And somebody asked him one day what was the best advice that he ever got, or the best advice that he likes to give people in terms of, pursuing their dreams. And he said that he firmly believes that nobody should have plan B. And most people do, it's smart to have a backup plan. But he was like, I think that if you have a backup plan, you're basically subconsciously telling yourself it's okay to settle for something less than what you ultimately want. And I was sitting backstage listening to this and I was like, no.
You knew your calling.
I was like, it's like he's talking to me, even though he wasn't. But that night I went home and I wrote him a letter. And I came to work the next day and I gave it to his assistant. And I said, hey, can you just give this to Steve? I just want him to know that something he said yesterday really kind of landed with me. And a couple minutes later, I get a call in my headset and it was like, hey, Audra, Steve wants to come or talk to you. So come back to backstage. And long story short, he was basically like, what are you doing here? What do you want to do? And I was like, I want to be a sports broadcaster. And he's like, awesome. I'll give you one more year. And if you're here after that, I'll fire you. And I was like, I think he's serious. I think he's actually serious. So so that night I went and updated my resume and my demo and sent it to every job that was open in the country. I even applied for a job in Alaska. And ended up getting an opportunity in Huntsville and The rest is history. So I always say, you know, good old Steve Harvey was very influential and instrumental in my sports career, which is a very random
Steve,
story.
If
I
you're
know.
watching.
I know. Yeah. And actually, there's a second part of that. I ended up telling that story to Nashville Sports and Entertainment Magazine when I was a sports anchor there, because at the time I was the only female sports reporter or anchor in Nashville. And so they were doing an article, and I told the guy who was writing it that story. He included it in the article, and I was like, I should give this to Steve.
Yeah.
And so when I had some time off, I drove from Nashville down to Atlanta, where we used to film Family Feud, and I sat in the audience, and he saw me, and I ended up giving the magazine to his assistant again.
Oh my gosh.
And then he was like, come backstage, he wants to talk to you. Steve came out of his dressing room with the magazine and a marker, and he made me autograph the article for him, and he kept it, which was really sweet. Yeah. Yeah. So good old Steve Harvey. And then the guy who ended up writing the article was actually just a freelance journalist, ended up quitting his full-time finance job to pursue sports journalism full-time as well. And so it was kind of just one of those that has gone way beyond just that one conversation that I had with Steve at this point, 10 plus years ago.
That's an incredible story.
Crazy, right? You just never know how one conversation sometimes can totally change the trajectory of your life, but that's what it was.
But it's such great advice too.
It is. You know, it's
with this, especially this space, you really have to dive headfirst
Yep.
into broadcast. That's kind of, I had no experience when I went to college.
Yep.
I decided randomly in high school that I wanted to do sports broadcast. People are always like, that's kind of risky, right? And I'm like, but you have to do that in order to see success when it comes to especially this kind of business, but I think in everyday life too, when you think about it.
Yeah, because I agree. I was a little hesitant. I think one of the reasons that I took the job with the Braves was because I had convinced myself that I didn't want to move to a small town. I'm from Chicago,
right.
You know, and Orlando's a big city. I convinced myself that I wouldn't like working in a small town, and I didn't want to go that route. And then inevitably realize that that's what you have to do, you know, a lot of times to be successful in this industry. So I just needed that kick in the butt from somebody, and it ended up being Steve Harvey of all people. So,
you know, Steve will do that.
Yeah,
I feel like.
he will. He's a good dude. I'm a big fan. I'm a lifelong fan.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a bigger fan now because of that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And Steve, you know, you never know what these people are like. They always say, don't meet your heroes, but it sounds like maybe not so much with Steve Harvey.
Yeah, it was funny because before I started working on Family Feud, I always liked the show, and I liked Steve as an actor and a comedian and stuff, but I didn't know a ton about him until I started working there and got to hear him, you know, speak to the audience and speak to people that were playing, and you can just hear how much he does care about people and the passion that he has for what he does. And it was impossible to be in a bad mood going to work there every day, because obviously he's hilarious, but those things, those conversations he would have apply to so many different aspects in life that I would just sit there backstage feeling like I had gone to church that day, you know, like so inspired and stuff. So I'm very, very grateful for the time that I had working there.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay, when we come back, we're going to dive more in depth into Audra's career post Steve Harvey advice. So stay with us. Well, welcome back. If you missed our first segment, we've got Audra Martin in with us today, FanDuel Sports North, host, anchor, reporter, and D, all of the above. But we're talking about her career on National Girls and Women in Sports Day, celebrating women in sports in the Twin Cities. We were talking about how Steve Harvey gave you this great advice of never have a plan B.
Yep.
So what you did was you basically quit your job, started looking for broadcast jobs because you knew that's what you wanted to do. You ended up in Huntsville, Alabama.
Yeah.
So walk us through your career, Huntsville, how long were you there, where you went after that, and how you ended up where you are now.
Yeah, so Huntsville was an amazing opportunity, especially for a sports town. It probably isn't one that jumps out to a lot of people, but any of those towns or markets anywhere in SEC country is going to be great, because you have the ability to just talk about Auburn and Alabama football all day long, every day. It was fantastic. But then there was the University of Alabama Huntsville. It had a hockey team, and their baseball and softball programs are both really good too. So there was a lot of opportunities and a lot of sports in that town for it being a mid-sized market. It was actually a fantastic first step. It was tough though, because my sports director ended up leaving only a couple months after I started.
Oh wow!
And so I was a one-person sports department. in the middle of football season. So I would be on the sidelines, in the rain shooting Friday Night Football, having to then run back to the station to get ready to anchor the Friday Night Football show.
All by yourself.
Yeah, and so there was a stretch, I think at one point I had worked, I know it was over a month straight. It was like 40 something days without a day off. And it was a grind and I was miserable and exhausted. But I look back on it now and I'm so grateful for it because my gosh, learned so much and trial by fire and, and all that. And so that was it was a great market. And then from there, I got an opportunity to move to Nashville to be a weekend sports anchor and reporter at the ABC affiliate in Nashville, and that was incredible.
Right.
My colleagues were amazing, and then obviously being able to talk about the Titans and the Predators, and then still continuing with SEC everything in Nashville was wonderful. So I was in Huntsville for a year, and then I was in Nashville for 2. And
wow, that was quick then.
It was quick. I'm very, very fortunate.
Yeah.
The way it all worked out was, faster than I thought, and I'm very blessed. Quicker than a lot of people. It just happened to be one of those situations where I didn't have a contract in Huntsville. They just never made me sign a contract. I don't know if they forgot or whatever it was, but so when my agent called and said there was an opportunity in Nashville,
there is a bug
flying around. It was being able to move from Huntsville after 1 year to Nashville was obviously a fantastic opportunity. I look back and I laugh. I still talk to my sports director in Nashville. I was probably not ready for that job. It would take me like an hour plus to cut like a 30-second VOSOT.
Yeah.
But I learned so much from him and just had an awesome experience there. And then an opportunity came available here in Minnesota. And so suddenly I was back in the Midwest and freezing my butt off after living in the South for 12 years. So I wouldn't have it any other way. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And so now it's been 10 years, which is insane.
But it's so much fun.
It is.
Right?
And Minnesota is a fantastic place. I mean, the people here are fantastic. I love the city. Obviously, the sports world here is wonderful despite all of the heartbreak that everybody goes through year after year.
I know.
Makes us stronger, right? But I absolutely love it here, and it's 10 years here has flown by.
I think something that's interesting that you were talking about specifically in Huntsville, like it was the same thing for me when I was in Florida. Mm-hmm. It's hot, it's muggy, it's gross. You're doing all these things, and then you're going in and you're anchoring these shows. I think that there's so many aspects to this job. Everyone thinks it's very glamorous.
No.
And it's not. It's not.
Don't be fooled.
People will tweet at me all the time about because it must be so hard to sit in there and read off the prompter. And I'm like, it's so much more. That's the fun part of the job.
Yes, right?
We do so much more than that.
Yeah.
So tell me about, I think that there's so many young women that are trying to get into sports broadcast, but they don't really understand sometimes just all of the elements that go into it. And also, it's okay to have the fear to fail. Mm-hmm. And that's why you start out small and you work your way up. So just some of the biggest lessons you feel like you've learned in your career.
Well, I think that's a big one. Not being afraid to fail, also not being afraid to, make mistakes and potentially make, an idiot out of yourself.
Right.
We've all had those moments where everything goes wrong on a broadcast. The prompter goes down, or they are running the wrong video, or all of those things, and you just have to go with the flow and do your best. But that's the benefit, of starting out in those smaller markets, is you make those mistakes in front of only a couple thousand people instead of hundreds of thousands or whatever it is. And I think another biggest thing for me was just constantly finding a way to believe in yourself, even on your worst days. And I still sometimes struggle with that. There are days where I'm like, how did I even get this job? I'm terrible.
Right.
You just feel like you don't actually deserve your dream opportunity. And so I try on those days to remind myself that I'm here for a reason, and even at my worst days, they're not as bad as you think. Your best days aren't as good as you think either, right? I know you can probably relate. You go back and watch a sportscast, and you're like, I nailed that. And then you watch, you're like, oh, that actually wasn't as good as I thought.
Yep.
And then you watch the ones that you think are terrible, and you're like, oh, that actually wasn't that bad. So I try to kind of keep that mindset going. And I always tell young girls that want to pursue this is you definitely have to have thick skin, but you have to be your biggest cheerleader too. You can't let the outside noise influence you and get in the way of pursuing what you ultimately want to do, because you can be your own worst enemy too. And it's really easy to fall into that like I said, that dark place of, telling yourself that you don't deserve
Right.
it. So I think, just, like you said, not being afraid to fail, believing in yourself even in the hardest times. And then especially being a woman in this industry, yes, you do have to work harder, I feel like, in certain ways. Not saying that the men don't. That's not what I'm saying at all. But there are always going to be people that think that you don't deserve this job or that you don't actually know what you're talking about.
Right.
And so sometimes it does take a little bit of extra preparation or whatever the case may be, to prove yourself and try to win over those haters. You're never going to win them all over, because
Right.
there are some that you could be the best in this entire industry and they're still going to say women don't belong in this role. But being willing to go the extra mile and put in the little extra effort goes a long way. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. And relying on other women in this business too.
Yes.
Which that's always, or not always, an easy thing either. Unfortunately, sometimes women, as women, we can be vicious to each other.
Right.
And ugly and nasty. And so I think, I'm so thankful for our friendship and, all the other women that I've met here in Minnesota. It's nice to be able to rely on each other and understand
Yes.
that there's other people who know the struggle too. So I think those would be the couple of things that just jump out to me in this crazy world of broadcasting.
I know, it is a crazy world. But when we come back, we are going to talk more about imposter syndrome in this business, what inspires you the most, and more about Audra's career. Well, welcome back. If you missed our earlier segments, we've got Audra Martin in with us today on National Girls and Women in Sports Day. We're celebrating women in sports, specifically here in the Twin Cities. So thank you so much for being
No,
in
thank
with
you
us,
for having me. I
Audra.
appreciate it.
We've talked about so much already, but one thing that we were kind of touching on in the last segment, and I think that a lot of people struggle with, is imposter syndrome, which I don't know if the audience knows this or not, but imposter syndrome actually comes from successful women. That's where it was created. It was a study on successful women.
I did not know that.
And that's where the term comes from. So for you, do you still struggle with imposter syndrome sometimes?
I feel like I'm the queen of it. Let's dive into this. What's really funny? Not only did I not know that, I actually hadn't heard the term imposter syndrome until about a year ago.
Really?
And it was one of my former interns who had posted something online about it, and I was like, "What?" And I Googled it, and I was like, "So that is what is going
what
on
I've
with
been
me. This is
feeling."
what
Yeah,
I've been
yeah.
feeling for the last 15 years, however long." Fascinating concept that I think probably every walk of life, every, doesn't man, woman, whatever industry you're in, I feel like anyone can have those moments of dealing with imposter syndrome.
Right.
I do every single day, to be
Same.
honest. There are days where it's easier to manage than others. But yeah, there are days, like I just said a second ago, where I'm like, how am I actually really good at this job?
Right.
Where people will come over and say hi, at Wild games and Twins games, and very, complimentary and nice. And I almost feel guilty accepting those compliments,
Right.
and sometimes I almost feel like they're just saying it to be nice, but it's not what they really mean. But again, that's just in my own head. It's like I've almost convinced myself in some ways that this is too good to be true. So I'm almost waiting for it to go away, and you can relate to that too, every year when it comes to contracts or, companies changing and all that, you're just praying that you still get to do this job every single day. And so, trying to balance that, get that voice out of your head and replace it with that positivity and belief in yourself is not easy. So again, to any young woman,
You're not
young
alone.
women out there, you are not alone. That imposter voice will probably be your friend for a while. It's just
Right.
it's a matter of managing it and understanding that you're not alone.
Yeah, and also accepting, for me, I always think of it as, this is something that I recently been thinking about, is a lot of women, obviously, like we just talked about, struggle with this. But it's also something that I feel like sometimes gives us an edge in the business, because a little bit of anxiety about whether what you're doing, it keeps you from getting a little too overconfident, too comfortable.
Too complacent too.
Right,
I think
too complacent, yes.
that's actually a really good point and a good way of looking at it. It's those days where you are, maybe just feeling complacent or not giving it your all. Well, then, those are going to be the shows and the games or whatever that you aren't going to be at your best.
Right.
So if there is that little voice in your head that's telling you, oh, you got to do better. Sometimes that's not a bad thing. You know?
It's the push that you need sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
On
Yep,
on
I
a
would
down
agree.
day.
I would agree.
For you, how important do you think that it is to, I was talking with Rebecca Brunson earlier, you guys have so many women on the FanDuel Sports North squad. So many women.
Yeah.
It was not that way even 5 years ago.
Yeah.
How inspiring and how important do you think it is for young women to be able to turn on a Wild Wolves, Twins, Lynx game and see so many women doing the coverage?
It's huge, and I know it's become a cliche over the years because there are so many women now these days where, you know, we talk about that a lot, where it's like, oh, it's nice to feel, you know, as a young girl, you know, representation and see somebody on TV doing what you want to do. But it is incredibly important. I mean, I'm going to be 40 in a couple months, and so when I was younger, there weren't that many female, you know, I mean, there's Pam Oliver and Michelle Tafoya and Andrea Kramer, you know, legends in this business, but they were so few and far between that it really did seem like it would be unattainable. You know, and when I was in college, that's when, you know, Erin Andrews and some of those women were kind of breaking in and starting to shatter that glass ceiling, if you will. Nowadays, when you see women all over the place, it just makes me so happy because I didn't have that when I was younger watching sports, and nothing, you know, makes me happier. I take so much pride in meeting those little girls at games, or, you know, talking to dads who will come over and say, you know, thank you for doing what you do because my daughter wants to, you know, be in sports broadcasting. And I'm always the first to say, I will pass that baton on proudly to your daughter. Nothing would make me happier than to, you know, hang up the skates and have another young girl come in and take over this position. And so, yeah, I think that for those young girls to just, as something as simple as being out to dinner and there's a television on and it's a female talking about a sport that they love, it is something as small as that they can say, okay, well, I can do that too. That wasn't always the case. And so I think the more women in this job, in this industry, the better. I love to go down that same path. The Minnesota Frost, the effect that I have seen with them, it has been huge. You know, I'd always have friends' daughters ask me like, oh, do you know Kirill Kaprizov? Or, you know, do you know Matt Boldy? And now it's, do you know Taylor Heise? You know, and that makes me so happy to see that these young girls now have a professional women's hockey team that's doing fantastically, getting good crowds and support, and now they have that to aspire to. It just makes, I'm getting goosebumps right now because it just makes me so happy to see that there's such success branching out all over the place and growing when it comes to women's sports as well, not just the broadcasting side of things.
I know, and the traction that women's sports has now too is just, it's not something that I had even dreamed of 2 years ago. And now seeing, you know, women's basketball, P-Dub, everything. We've got women's leagues starting up all the time now, and people are putting money into it, sponsoring these things. They want to get involved, and so it's so refreshing to see.
I agree.
But I do think it's so important for young girls to be able to see somebody that they see themselves in when it comes especially to what we do for a living.
Absolutely.
My last question for you is, who has inspired you the most in your career? I know that's sometimes hard to like nail one person down, but who do you think has inspired you the most?
In terms of my career, the person who has had the biggest impact on me by far is Kevin Burkhardt. He, at the time, you know, before he's calling the Super Bowl in, you know, a couple of weeks, he used to be the silent reporter for the Mets. And that was when I was working at the Atlanta Braves. And I just happened to meet him one day like, in the press dining hall or whatever. And I started talking to him and told him that, you know, I ultimately wanted to be in broadcasting. And my ultimate dream job has been from day one to be a sideline reporter in Major League Baseball. And so I started talking to him, and he was so kind. And he literally was like, you know, well, we're going to be back in town in a couple weeks. He's like, do you want to just shadow me for the day? And you can come on the field and shoot some stand-ups. And I was like, oh my God, absolutely. And I still have that tape of the stand-ups that I shot at Turner Field. They're atrocious. But it was as simple as that, as a conversation with a total stranger who was just like,
Come
you know,
on.
I've been there too, you know, like just come shadow me for the day. And so he ended up being somebody that I could rely on all for everything, you know, and there was opportunities every time they were in town. Basically, he would let me shoot stand-ups on the field, which, you know, is important. It's so important for that demo reel. It doesn't matter that I wasn't actually working the game, just to, you know, have stuff for your resume tape. And so over the years, we just, you know, kept in touch, and he was actually the one that got me in touch with my agent, who then was the one that presented the opportunity to me in Nashville and both here. So I still call him. I mean, I still be like, hey, how do I handle this? Or, what's a great, angle with this? Because I think he's one of the best in the business. I mean, you don't get to call the Super Bowl if you're not.
Right.
But yeah, so I met him, I think it was 2009.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I've known him for quite a bit. He's become a great friend of our family. My parents taking him out to dinner when he's in Chicago. I mean, because he went above and beyond helping me out, introducing me to people in the industry, and then just that person that I can call when I need advice. And it doesn't hurt to learn from one of the best in the biz, right? So that's why, when young women approach me or talk to me and they need advice, I always try to help, have people come shadow or, Zoom call, whatever I can do, because that's who Kevin was for me when I was younger. And it's all about paying it forward. So yeah, shout out Kevin Burkhardt. Have fun calling the Super Bowl. Yeah. Must be nice.
Have so much fun, Kevin.
Yeah, no, he's kicking butt out there in the business. And yeah, I'm very fortunate to have, again, randomly Kevin Burkhardt and Steve Harvey.
There you go.
Yeah, so
awesome.
I would say that he's been, one of the biggest influences and I guess greatest friends too in terms of helping with my career.
That's so good to know.
Very random.
Well, thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And I love that you're doing this. It's awesome to celebrate a really, really special and important day. So
it is. Thanks for having me. So many lovely women. Thanks so much, Audra.
Thank you. So good to see you.